Soft jazz hums through the rooftop restaurant, mingling with the faint clink of silverware and the low murmur of conversations. Outside the glass walls, San Francisco Bay glitters beneath a velvet sky, and there she sits, Emily Carter, tracing the rim of her wine glass, wishing she were anywhere but here. Her best friend called it a new beginning. To Emily, it feels like punishment, a blind date, with a stranger whose name she can't even remember. Her heart still carries the bruises of betrayal, and every polite smile tonight feels like a mask she can barely hold in place. But somewhere across the room, a man has already noticed her. Ethan Wallace, a name that makes headlines. Sharp suit, colder eyes, a man used to getting everything he wants, except peace. He came here out of obligation, not curiosity. Yet something about the woman sitting alone, fidgeting with her napkin, pulls him in before he can stop himself. Two people, both tired of pretending, both afraid to trust again. And in this quiet moment, under the soft glow of city lights, neither of them knows that what begins as a reluctant dinner will unravel every rule they've ever lived by. Because sometimes, the heart finds its match, right when we're ready to run. The elevator chimed softly as it reached the top floor, the metallic doors sliding open with a sigh. Warm light spilled out, mingling with the faint hum of live music drifting through the air. Beyond the glass walls, San Francisco shimmered under a thin layer of fog, the Bay Bridge glowing like a silver thread against the night. Emily Carter hesitated at the entrance to the horizon. Her heels clicked too loudly on the marble floor, her pulse keeping rhythm beneath her ribs. She hated evenings like this, too polished, too perfect, too full of strangers who spoke in practiced tones. The maître d' greeted her with a polite smile, his eyes flicking from her simple navy dress to the glittering couples behind him. "Reservation for Miss Carter," she murmured. "Of course," he said, scanning the list. "Your party is already here." Of course he is, she thought. Her best friend Rachel's voice echoed in her mind. "Come on, Em. One dinner. He's smart, successful, and not a total jerk. What's the worst that could happen?" Emily exhaled slowly. "Lead the way." The restaurant was a sea of candlelight and glass. Couples leaned close over their meals, laughter floating through the air like bubbles from champagne. She followed the waiter to a corner table near the window and stopped. The man waiting there looked like he had stepped out of a magazine. Sharp suit, dark hair perfectly in place, a watch that probably cost more than her car. He stood as she approached, tall and composed, his expression unreadable. Emily Carter. His voice was smooth, low, a tone that carried both confidence and distance. "Yes," she said, forcing a polite smile. "You must be Ethan Wallace." He confirmed, offering his hand. His grip was firm, deliberate. She'd heard the name before, the tech mogul who'd built a billion-dollar company before turning 40. The press called him the man of steel. Women called him impossible. They sat, for a few seconds, silence stretched between them, softened only by the murmur of nearby tables. Emily reached for the water glass to steady her hands. Ethan studied her with quiet curiosity, as if trying to decode her. "So," he said finally, "you're an interior designer." "Yes." She stirred the water with her straw, buying herself a second before answering. "I just moved here. Starting over, I guess." "Starting over?" he repeated, his tone thoughtful. "That sounds brave." She smiled faintly. Or foolish. Something flickered in his eyes. Maybe amusement, maybe something else. Foolishness and bravery aren't that different. Depends on how it ends. For the first time that night, Emily met his gaze fully. There was warmth behind that cool exterior, faint, but real. Still. She looked away first. When the waiter arrived with menus, Ethan waved him off politely. "Would you mind if I ordered for us?" Emily arched a brow. "That depends." "Do you always make the decisions for your dates?" His lips curved, almost a smile. "Only when they look like they'd rather be anywhere else." Her cheeks warmed. He wasn't wrong. She'd spent the entire day trying to come up with excuses not to show up. But Rachel had cornered her, dressed her up, and sent her out the door with a warning, "Don't run this time." She hadn't realized how visible her hesitation was until Ethan called it out. "I didn't mean to seem rude," she said softly. "Blind dates just aren't my thing." "Neither are they mine," he admitted, "but apparently my image could use a little softening." He said it like a joke, but something in his voice hinted at truth. Emily tilted her head. "So this is business for you." His eyes met hers sharp, steady. "No, not tonight." Something in the way he said it made her chest tighten. The air between them shifted, just a fraction like the quiet before a change in weather. Dinner arrived, sea bass glazed with lemon butter, and a bottle of wine neither of them had asked for, but somehow matched perfectly. Conversation found its rhythm hesitant at first, then natural. They talked about travel, music, cities they loved and left. Ethan spoke of building something from nothing, of long nights and empty victories. Emily spoke of colors and light, of how she could make even small rooms feel alive again. At one point, she laughed, really laughed at something he said about learning to cook and almost setting his kitchen on fire. The sound surprised her. She hadn't heard her own laughter in a while. Ethan noticed. His expression softened, the edges of his practiced composure melting away. "You should laugh more often," he said quietly. "It suits you." Emily froze for half a heartbeat, then smiled, unsure what to do with the warmth that rose in her chest. Compliments from men like him usually felt rehearsed. This one didn't. Outside the window, the city pulsed with light bridges glowing, waves flickering below. Somewhere, a foghorn called in the distance, low and mournful. She found herself watching him as he spoke, the way he gestured subtly with his hands, the quiet gravity in his words. There was something undeniably magnetic about him. But she reminded herself that magnets could also pull you into danger. When the waiter cleared their plates, Ethan leaned back in his chair, studying her again. "You're not what I expected," he said. Emily raised an eyebrow. "And what exactly did you expect someone impressed by the restaurant?" he said. "By the name, the view, the idea of being here with me. And I ruined that illusion for you." He smiled, slow, genuine this time. "You made it interesting." The simplicity of that answer disarmed her. For a second, the noise of the restaurant faded, the clinking glasses, the soft piano replaced by the steady rhythm of her heartbeat. She glanced down, tracing the edge of her napkin. "Interesting isn't always good." "No." He agreed. "But it's real." The words lingered between them. Real. A word both of them had forgotten how to trust. When the bill came, Ethan reached for it. She tried to protest, but he stopped her with a quiet, "Please, let me." His tone wasn't arrogant, just final, like a man who had spent too long controlling things he didn't want to lose. As they stood to leave, Emily caught her reflection in the glass, cheeks faintly flushed, eyes brighter than they'd been in months. She almost didn't recognize herself. Outside, the wind carried the scent of the ocean. Ethan offered his arm, not out of habit, but hesitation, an unspoken question. She hesitated too, then took it. For a brief moment, their steps fell in sync. Neither spoke. The night around them seemed to hum softly, as if the city itself was holding its breath. And somewhere deep inside, Emily felt it, that quiet, inexplicable sense that something had just shifted. She didn't know what it was yet, only that when she looked up at the horizon, the city lights blurred into gold, and for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like running. The wind at the rooftop nudged the glass, a quiet tap-tap like a nervous finger. Emily stepped beside the window, her hand still resting in the crook of Ethan's arm, then let go as if she'd touched something too warm. City lights trembled across the bay like a necklace someone had just clasped. For a breath, neither of them spoke. She felt the echo of dinner in her chest, the laughter she didn't expect, the way his voice gentled when he listened, and it scared her in the small, honest way new things do. She turned first, meaning to thank him for the meal, to say goodnight before feelings complicated the hour. And there he was, facing her across the small round table, his chair pulled in, his posture easy but guarded. A man trained to look like he didn't care, and a pair of eyes that had never learned that trick. Their gazes met. It lasted a heartbeat. Then another. Time thinned. Emily felt the old instinct rise, step back, lower her eyes, fold into safe. Instead, she held the look, because something in him softened when she did, and because she needed to know if what she felt at dinner was a slip of stage light or the first true spark in a long, cold room. "Ethan," she said, barely above the hush of the music. "Emily," he answered, the syllables slow and careful, like he was tasting them for the first time. A server passed with a silver tray, and the small world between them rippled and settled again. He gestured to the chair opposite his, and she sat. The table's candle made a pool of gold on the linen, too bright for a moment, so she looked to the glass wall, to the black water, the long mile of bridge, the pinpricks of headlights threading home and then back to him. The pull was still there, clear, unwelcome and welcomed all at once. He cleared his throat. A small, human sound. Was the sea bass all right? It was perfect, she said. I'm more of a soup person, but tonight perfect. So, you're a soup person, he repeated, as if collecting a rare fact. She smiled, because it was nothing and somehow intimate. Tomato on rainy days, chicken noodle when I can't sleep, clam chowder when I miss the ocean but don't want to drive the miles. He nodded, and she watched his jaw unclench. I burn pasta, he said. It's an achievement. Boiling water is ambitious, she teased, and the corner of his mouth lifted. A quiet beat. The band changed songs. The piano dropped into a slower key. Somewhere behind them, ice clinked in a glass and then stilled. A soft breath. Just that. She let her fingers trace the rim of her water glass, the cool, perfect circle anchoring her. You don't seem like the person I read about. He didn't flinch. Neither do you. What did you read? Her voice stayed gentle, but she braced anyway. That you were the woman alone at the window, he said, glancing toward the city. Not in a headline. In my head. She blinked. That's not exactly a resume. No, he said. But it's the one detail I don't want to lose. The words landed in her chest with a weight and a warmth. Dangerous, she warned herself. People like him say difficult things lightly. People like her believe light things too quickly. She pressed her palm to the linen so her hand would stop shaking. Across from her, Ethan leaned in. Not much, just enough to make the candle's wick bow in his shadow. Tell me something true, he said, and the request was simple enough to undo her. Emily glanced at the door, as if the elevator could offer a quick exit. It didn't. So she tried the truth he asked for. A small piece, one she could afford. I almost didn't come. She said, I told myself the dress didn't fit. The shoes would rub. The wind on the rooftop would ruin my hair. I had a dozen reasons. All of them were fear with an accessory. He let that sit. And you still came? Rachel, she said. A soft smile for her stubborn friend. She said, Stop canceling your life. He nodded like he recognized the tone. We all need a Rachel. I'm guessing yours has a title, she said. Chief of staff, board chair, personal trainer who knows your calendar better than you do. Richard, he replied, amused. Deputy, old friend, human shield. From what she asked. From me, he said, not joking now. From what I become when everything is about the next mile, the next quarter, the next headline. The air stretched thin and quiet between them again. She could hear the piano, the slow walk of notes, the brush of a cymbal like rain on a porch roof. Her chest softened. She didn't want to see herself in him. Not here, not yet. But she knew what it was to outrun your own shadow. To arrive in a new city with boxes and plans and not enough courage for either. "Tell me something true," she said, returning the question to him. His eyes didn't move. "I hate this view." She laughed before she could stop it. "Everyone loves this view." "I don't," he said, and the way he said it made the laugh fade to a quiet line of breath. "It looks like success. It feels like distance." She looked back through the glass. Bridge, boats, 1,000 tiny apartments lit like small promises. She understood. The beautiful far away can make the near feel empty. "Okay," she said, softer. "Then let's not look at it." They didn't. They looked at each other. Another breath, small, easy. A pair of guests brushed by their table, the woman's perfume soft as powder, the man's voice a murmur of names and deals. Emily felt the old difference rise up, the one that separates the tables that matter from the tables that don't. She rolled her shoulders once, subtle, to loosen the feeling. He watched her do it. Something in his gaze changed warmer, maybe closer. "Does the noise bother you?" he asked. "Only the noise in my head," she said. "And what's it saying?" "Leave before you like him," she answered, surprising herself with the clean honesty of it. He sat back, not offended, not wounded, just listening. "That's a reasonable strategy. It's kept me upright," she said. "And alone," he added, not unkindly. She looked down, the candle's light washing her knuckles gold. "There are worse things." "There are," he agreed. "Pretending, for example?" The word curled around them. She thought of her last year. The almost altar. The last-minute text with its neat sentence that broke everything. The ring in a small box that never found a finger. She thought of how easy it is to wear a brave face until it becomes a mask you can't peel away. She drew a slow breath through her nose and let it go. "Do you want to try this again?" he asked after a while. "This," she echoed. "Meeting me," he said. "Without the script, without the view." She tilted her head. "Do you have a location in mind?" He glanced toward the door, and for a moment he looked young, in a way money can't erase. "There's a deli 2 blocks down that slices their pickles too thick. It's infuriating. But the bread is good, and the coffee tastes like a diner where the waitress calls you hon whether you deserve it or not." She laughed. "Light and easy this time. You hate the view and you love bad coffee. This is excellent data." "Soup tomorrow," he said, mouth almost a smile. "We can argue about pickles. Pickles are a hill I will die on," she replied, and something bright moved between them, gentler than flirtation, steadier than a joke, the kind of light that finds the floor even when the lamp is turned away. The server returned to ask about dessert. Ethan looked to her and did not answer for her. She noticed. "Maybe next time," Emily said, and the server disappeared as quietly as he'd come. They rose. He didn't reach for her coat. He waited until she slipped her arms into the sleeves and then held the door with a small, ordinary courtesy that felt better than spectacle. In the elevator lobby, the world cooled marble underfoot, a clean scent, the hush of late hour. The numbers above the doors counted down from 52 like a patient heartbeat. She stood with her hands tucked into her pockets, feeling the smooth lining, the tiny stitch seam that had come loose and needed mending. She would sew it when she got home. She liked small repairs. They gave her a sense of control no skyline could offer. He shifted slightly, not crowding her. "If you change your mind about pickles," he said, "I'll try to survive. If you burn the soup," she said, "I'll order grilled cheese. That's my peace plan." "Deal," he answered, low and warm. The elevator chimed. The doors slid open, a bright square of steel and light. They stepped in. For a moment, the two of them in the mirrored box looked like a picture you could misread. Expensive suit, navy coat, a small gap of air where a hand might go and didn't. The doors closed. The car dropped. Emily watched their reflection, watched how she didn't flinch away, watched his eyes find hers there in the glass. not the direct way, but the way you look when you're careful of everything you break. Her throat tightened and eased in the same breath. On the ground floor, the lobby was nearly empty, a late bouquet on the concierge desk. A security guard with a paperback folded open one-handed. The revolving door turned slow. 3 panes, 3 chances to step forward or hold back. They took the same pane, a fraction too close, and the night air came at them, cool and salt-tinged, a thin veil against the skin. "I'll call you," he said, almost awkward, and somehow that was the most human thing he'd done all evening. She nodded. "Okay." He didn't reach for a handshake or a hug. He didn't ask for more than he'd earned. He simply stood with her on the sidewalk as if that exact square of concrete were the one true place to be. Cabs hissed past on wet pavement. A gull called from the dark like a child trying out its voice. They looked at each other one last time. The pull was there, steady now. Not a shove, not a trick, a quiet gravity that said, "Stay curious." Emily touched the edge of her coat collar, a tiny fix, a small brave thing. "Good night." "Ethan, good night." "Emily." She turned toward the street, toward the miles between here and her small apartment, toward a sink where she would rinse off the day and a lamp she would leave on a little longer than usual. She took 3 steps and stopped. The city hummed. The water breathed. She glanced back over her shoulder. He was still there, hands in his pockets, face lifted just enough that the streetlight caught his eyes and made them kinder. He hadn't moved. He didn't need to. Something shifted in her then, the way a door swings an inch on a hinge you thought was rusted shut. Not much, but enough. The next evening arrived dressed in soft gray clouds and the faint smell of rain on pavement. Inside the horizon, the same golden lights hummed above the tables, but the air between Emily and Ethan felt different now, less polite, more alive. The kind of quiet charged not with comfort, but with curiosity. She could feel his gaze before she even looked up from the menu. He wasn't staring, not exactly. He was studying her, like a puzzle whose edges didn't quite fit the picture. Emily lifted her eyes and caught him mid-thought. "Do you always analyze people over dinner?" Her tone was light, teasing, but the glint in her eyes warned him not to take her lightly. He leaned back in his chair, a faint smile curving at the corner of his mouth. "Only when they look like they're trying very hard not to be interesting." She set down the menu, folding her hands in her lap. "Maybe I'm just trying not to be predictable, impossible," he said softly, and she wasn't sure if it was a compliment or a challenge. The waiter arrived to take their order, and for a few moments the rhythm of clinking glasses filled the silence. When they were alone again, Ethan spoke, his tone casual. "So, tell me something honest. Why did you really agree to meet me?" Emily tilted her head, her expression unreadable. "Because my friend wouldn't stop calling until I said yes. And maybe because I was curious. Curious about me." "No," she said, taking a slow sip of water. "About how bad this could go." He laughed, quietly at first, then fuller. It wasn't a sound she expected from him. It cracked the careful image she'd built of the cold CEO. "That's brutally honest." "I find it saves time," she replied, shrugging. Ethan leaned forward, elbows resting lightly on the table. "And now that you've met me, how bad is it?" She met his gaze without flinching. "Too early to tell. You're very composed. People who are always composed usually have something to hide." The smile faded from his lips, but not from his eyes. "Maybe I just don't like wasting words." Or feelings, she asked. The question hung between them, not sharp, but heavy. He didn't answer right away, and that silence said enough. The food arrived salmon for him, risotto for her, but neither seemed in a hurry to eat. Rain began to tap against the windows, slow and steady. It softened the city below into a blur of lights and motion. Ethan broke the silence. "You think I'm hiding something?" "I think everyone is," she said gently. "Some people hide it with smiles, others with silence. You, with control." He let the words sit there, watching her as if she'd peeled back a curtain he didn't know she could reach. "And what about you?" he asked. "What do you hide?" "Emily," she smiled, faintly, like she'd been expecting the question. Disappointment. That stopped him. His fork paused halfway to his mouth. "From what? From believing too easily," she said. "In people, in promises, in perfect dinners with men who seemed too calm for their own good." He didn't smile this time. His eyes softened. "Then you should probably stop coming to dinners like this." "I should." She agreed, "but then I'd miss out on the challenge." He laughed again, quiet, genuine. "You don't sound like a woman who runs from challenges." "I don't," she said. "I just know when I'm being tested." The band in the corner shifted to a slower melody, something tender that filled the spaces their words left open. For a while, they both listened. Ethan reached for his wine, his thumb tracing the rim of the glass before he spoke again. "You know, most people talk to me like they're walking on ice. You're the first who seems to enjoy the cracks." "I don't enjoy them," she said softly. "I just know what's underneath isn't as cold as you pretend." He blinked, caught off guard, then smiled a real one, small and warm, the kind that makes you forget why you were guarded in the first place. "Who told you that?" he asked. "No one had to," she said. "It's written all over you. People only wear armor that heavy when they've been hurt before." His gaze dropped, the first sign of unease she'd seen in him all night. "You read people well." "I design homes for a living," she said. "You learn to feel a room before you move a single piece of furniture." He nodded, thoughtful. "And what do you feel right now?" She hesitated. "Like I'm standing in a room that's beautiful but hasn't been lived in for a long time." Ethan's breath caught. He looked away, out toward the rain, as if the city lights could give him something to say. They didn't. For a while. They sat in silence. The kind of silence that doesn't demand to be broken. When she finally spoke again, her voice was gentle. "You don't have to tell me what happened, Ethan, but you don't have to keep pretending you're fine, either." His shoulders eased just slightly, and the edge in his voice melted. "You're a strange woman. Emily Carter. I get that a lot. You make it sound like you're proud of it." "Maybe I am," she said, smiling. "Normal's overrated." He looked at her for a long moment, then leaned back, a quiet sigh escaping him. "You know, when I walked in here tonight, I thought I'd be bored. You're inconveniently interesting." "I'll take that as a compliment," she said, eyes glinting. "It is," he said simply. Outside, thunder rolled faintly over the bay. The rain turned heavier, streaking the glass in blurred silver lines. Emily found herself watching the water slip down the window, each drop chasing another, merging, disappearing. When she turned back, Ethan was still watching her, not in the way men stare when they want something, but in the way someone looks when they're trying to remember. She set down her fork, her pulse slow and steady. "What are you thinking?" He hesitated, then said quietly that maybe tonight isn't supposed to end like all the others. Her lips parted, a small breath caught between surprise and fear. She didn't answer, not with words. The air around them thickened, heavy with something unsaid but deeply understood. For a long time, neither of them moved. Finally, she smiled soft, almost invisible, and said, "Careful, Mr. Wallace. You sound almost human." He laughed again, the sound low and warm, and for the first time, he didn't look like the man the newspapers described. He looked like someone just beginning to remember what it felt like to be seen. Outside, the rain began to slow, and the candle on their table flickered, its flame bending gently, as if nodding to something inevitable. Emily looked at that small light and felt it something shifting, fragile but real. And in that quiet space between one breath and the next, she realized she no longer wanted the night to end. Outside the restaurant, the rain had turned into a fine mist, hanging in the air like unspoken words. Ethan held the door for her, his hand brushing lightly against the small of her back as they stepped out. It wasn't deliberate, just a quiet gesture, but it sent a ripple through Emily's chest all the same. The city glowed beneath them, lights smeared across wet pavement, taxis moving like fireflies in the fog. She had planned to say goodnight, to end the evening on a polite note, but her voice wouldn't quite form the words. Ethan looked up at the gray sky and smiled faintly. "The rain's letting up," he said. "Coffee." She blinked. "Now? Unless you have another date to rush off to?" he teased, his tone light, but his eyes searching. Emily hesitated, then nodded. "Coffee sounds fine." They walked side by side down the slick street, their reflections weaving together in puddles. The city was quieter now, late enough that the usual noise had faded into the soft rhythm of passing tires and the occasional honk in the distance. When they reached a small corner cafe with fogged windows and the smell of roasted beans curling into the air, Ethan pushed the door open for her. Inside, the place was nearly empty. A few night owls hunched over laptops, a barista cleaning the counter with slow circles. The lights were dim, warm, almost too intimate for two people who barely knew each other. Emily slid into a booth by the window, her damp hair sticking slightly to her cheek. Ethan sat across from her, loosening his tie, as if to prove he could. "You don't really seem like the coffee at midnight type," she said, watching him over the rim of her cup. He tilted his head. "What type do I seem like? The schedule every minute type. The kind who needs permission to breathe." He laughed, surprised. "That's not far off." She smiled. "I figured, for a while." They talked about nothing, the weather, the music, the way San Francisco always seemed to exist halfway between dream and exhaustion. And yet, under the small talk, something deeper began to stir. Ethan found himself asking questions he never asked anyone, about her move, her work, her reasons. Emily spoke softly, her words careful but not guarded. She told him about the new apartment she'd barely unpacked, about the quiet she hadn't yet learned to love, about the feeling of starting over when you're old enough to know what you've lost. He listened not the way people listen to reply, but the way someone listens to remember. "You make it sound easy," he said finally. "It's not," she admitted. "But I'm learning that peace doesn't come from staying. Sometimes it's what you find when you finally leave." Ethan nodded slowly, his gaze drifting to the rain streaking down the window. "I wouldn't know. I've never been good at leaving." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was heavy, honest. She could sense it in his posture, the small stiffness of someone carrying too much weight behind calm words. "You mean the company?" she asked gently. He looked up. "I mean everything. When you build something from scratch, it owns you before you realize it." "Sounds lonely," she said. "It is," he replied. "But it feels safer than needing anyone." Emily's chest tightened. She understood that too well, the illusion of safety that came from keeping people at arm's length. She watched him for a moment, the way his shoulders rounded slightly when he thought no one noticed, and something in her softened. Without meaning to, she smiled. "You're not as scary as you think you are." He looked up, startled, then laughed. "I'll take that as a compliment." "It was," she said, stirring her coffee. "Mostly." The warmth between them was subtle, not forced. It didn't rush in, it settled, slow and sure, like steam rising from the cup between them. Outside, the rain picked up again, light tapping against the glass. The city blurred beyond it, just lights in motion, distant and beautiful. Ethan glanced at her, then out the window. "You ever feel like this city is watching you?" he asked. "All the time," she said, "but I think it forgets quickly." He smiled. "Maybe that's what I like about it." They sat there until the barista began stacking chairs. When they finally stepped back outside, the air was cool, the street glistening under street lamps. Ethan held the door open again, and this time, when their eyes met, neither of them looked away. "Thank you for the coffee," Emily said. "Thank you for staying," he replied. The words were simple, but she heard what he didn't say. For not running. They walked back toward the main street together. She noticed the way he matched his pace to hers, the way his hand hovered just close enough that she could feel the warmth of it through the space between them. When they reached the corner, she stopped. "My apartment's that way," she said, pointing toward the faint glow of a distant street. He nodded. "And mine's the other." Neither moved. For a few heartbeats, they stood there under the streetlight. The world around them slowed to a hum. Emily broke the silence first. "You know, this is the part where most people say, 'I'll call you.'" Ethan smiled. "Then I guess I'm not most people." Her eyes narrowed, amused. "So, what will you say?" He looked at her for a long moment, his voice quieter when it came. "I'll see you soon." The simplicity of it made her heart stutter. She nodded once, unable to find words, and turned to walk away. But halfway down the block, she stopped and glanced back. He was still there, hands in pockets, face tilted slightly upward, watching the rain fall through the streetlight. For the first time in months, she didn't feel like she was leaving something behind. She felt like something was finally beginning. And though she couldn't name it yet, she knew this whatever thread had started to weave between them tonight. It was no illusion, it was quiet, it was real, and it was pulling her somewhere she hadn't dared to go in a long time. The night stretched wide and quiet above them, a dark silk sky stitched with silver lights. Ethan led her up to the rooftop terrace of the horizon, where the view opened in every direction, the city glittering below, the bay breathing softly, and the Golden Gate Bridge stretching out like a ribbon of fire across the water. The rain had stopped, leaving the air cool and new. Emily stepped closer to the edge, her hands resting lightly on the railing, eyes tracing the faint shimmer of fog rolling in from the Pacific. "Beautiful," she whispered. Ethan stood a few feet behind her, his voice low. "It is, but somehow, it looks different tonight." She turned slightly, catching his reflection in the glass. Different how he paused, less like a view, more like a memory. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The wind tugged at her hair, and she tucked a strand behind her ear. She wanted to say something, anything to keep the air from thickening, but what came out instead was a truth she hadn't planned to tell. "I was supposed to get married here once," she said quietly. Ethan's brow lifted, surprised. "Here, not here exactly," she said, nodding toward the faint outline of the bridge. "At a little venue by the water, near Sausalito, 3 years ago." His expression softened. "What happened?" Emily's hands tightened on the cold railing. "He happened. Daniel. We'd been together 5 years. We met in college. He was funny, ambitious, the kind of person who could talk his way into anything." She drew in a slow breath. "When he proposed, I thought, that was it. My story was written." Ethan didn't interrupt. He only watched her, the city's light painting a faint glow across her face. But a month before the wedding, she continued, his company started falling apart. Investors pulled out. He called it a temporary problem. Then one day, I found out he'd gone behind my back, sold my designs to one of his clients to cover his losses. The money he used to buy the ring, it came from that. Her voice cracked, just slightly. He said he did it for us. But the truth was, he did it because he was afraid to fail. Ethan's throat tightened. "Did you leave him?" "I tried to forgive him," she admitted. "I even told myself I could pretend it didn't matter. But when someone lies to you that easily, you start lying to yourself too. So, on the morning of the wedding, I packed my things and drove away. The quiet that followed felt heavy, but clean, like rain settling into the ground. Ethan spoke softly. "That must have taken courage. Maybe," she said, "or maybe it was just survival." A breeze swept through, cool and steady. Emily turned toward him, her eyes reflecting the bridge lights. "What about you? You said you're not good at leaving. What did you mean?" He hesitated, his gaze dropping to the ground. "It's not something I talk about." "Then maybe tonight's the exception," she said gently. He looked up, and for a moment, Something in his face wavered, the CEO's calm replaced by something raw, uncertain. "My mother left when I was 8, he said finally. "She walked out one morning, said she was going to the store. She never came back." Emily's breath caught. "My father told me she needed space." Ethan continued, "But weeks passed, then months. Eventually, he stopped saying anything at all. He buried himself in work, and I learned to do the same." He looked out toward the horizon, his voice dropping to a whisper. "When I built my company, I thought I was building control. But all I really built was distance." Emily's heart ached in a way she hadn't expected. "You were just trying to keep from being left again." He smiled, sad and small. "Guess I didn't do a great job. I lost people anyway. Friends, relationships. My father, too. He died before we could even talk about her." The wind brushed between them, carrying the faint scent of salt and rain. Emily stepped closer, not enough to break the space, but enough that he could feel her presence. "I'm sorry," she said softly. He shook his head. "Don't be. It's just strange. You can have everything people think they want: money, success, headlines, and still feel like the kid standing at the door, waiting for someone who isn't coming back." His words hung in the air, fragile and true. Emily felt the sting of tears in her eyes, though she didn't let them fall. She understood that loneliness, the kind that settles deep, where even silence feels too loud. She wanted to say something comforting, but instead she said, "It's not weakness, you know? Wanting someone to stay." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and for a moment, the air between them shifted again. Something old and aching found its reflection in something soft and new. Ethan exhaled slowly, the sound quiet as the wind. "You know, I didn't expect this. What she asked. He said simply. "I thought tonight would be like every other night I've spent pretending to connect. But you're—" He searched for the word, then smiled faintly. "You're unsettling." Emily Carter. She laughed softly, wiping at the corner of her eye. "That might be the most honest compliment I've ever received." He chuckled, the tension easing a little. "I mean it, I know," she said, her voice warm. "And for what it's worth, you're not as untouchable as they say." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of the hum of the city, the quiet beat of two guarded hearts beginning to open. They stood there until the breeze turned colder, until the last light from the bridge shimmered like a distant promise. Emily felt the pull of the moment, the urge to step closer, to bridge the inch of air that still kept them apart, but she didn't. Not yet. Instead, she said softly, "You should forgive her someday." Ethan turned to her. "My mother." She nodded. "Maybe not for her sake. For yours?" He didn't reply, but his eyes said enough. He would think about it, maybe for the first time in years. The wind carried the faint sound of waves against the shore. Below them, the city went on unaware that, on this quiet rooftop, two people who had forgotten how to trust were learning again, one breath at a time, and as they finally turned to leave, Ethan glanced at her, really looked, and something in his expression had changed. The distance was gone. The walls, thinner. He didn't say goodnight. He didn't have to. Because in the silence between them, something deeper had already been spoken. The air on the rooftop was cool enough to taste. It carried the faint scent of rain and steel, the quiet hum of the city far below. Emily stood beside Ethan, her hands resting lightly on the metal railing, her heartbeat still tangled with the things they'd just confessed. The Golden Gate shimmered in the distance, half wrapped in fog, its lights blinking through the mist like tiny, steady promises. She could still hear his voice soft, hesitant when he spoke about his mother. There was something about that moment, the way truth stripped away everything that usually protected them. The air felt fragile, like a held breath that might never return. For a long time, neither of them moved. The night seemed to pause with them, Emily's eyes followed the faint ripple of water far below, the red span of the bridge glowing through the fog, and she thought this city doesn't know how many hearts are breaking beneath its lights. Ethan took a quiet step closer. It wasn't a bold move, not even deliberate, just enough for her to feel the warmth of his coat brush the fabric of her sleeve. He looked at her, not in the way men look when they're trying to charm, but like he was afraid of losing something he hadn't even earned yet. "Emily," he said softly, her name almost lost in the wind. She turned toward him, her breath catching in the cold air. His eyes held hers steady, searching, uncertain. And in that moment, she realized how tired she was of running from the things that might hurt her. For years, she had built walls tall, clean, perfect, but standing there, under the quiet sky, beside a man who looked just as breakable as she felt, she wondered if safety had cost her too much. The distance between them narrowed without effort, as if some invisible thread had simply pulled them closer. He didn't reach for her. He just waited, and she understood that waiting was the most honest thing he could do. So she closed the space herself, just a step small, but enough. Her hand brushed his arm, his breath faltered, the city seemed to fall silent. Then, as if drawn by something older than words, their lips met slow, unsure, almost hesitant. It wasn't a kiss that asked for anything. It was a quiet, trembling exchange, the kind that doesn't need to prove itself, the kind that says, "I see you. I don't know what comes next, but I'm here, for a heartbeat." She felt everything: the warmth of his mouth, the faint taste of coffee, the sound of her pulse rushing in her ears. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't practiced, but it was real, and that was enough. When they finally parted, the world felt changed, the air sharper, the lights brighter. Emily drew back slightly, her hand still resting against his chest. She could feel his heartbeat, quick, uneven, alive. He looked at her, his voice barely a whisper. "I didn't plan that. Neither did I," she said. They both laughed. Quietly. The kind of laugh that breaks tension and makes the night feel less impossible. But underneath that laughter, something had shifted, something neither could undo. Ethan brushed his thumb along the edge of her jaw, his touch light, reverent. "You're shaking," he said. "I know." "Are you cold?" She shook her head. No. It was the truth. What she felt wasn't cold. It was something deeper, a stirring of fear and hope all tangled together. He looked at her as if trying to memorize every line of her face. "You don't have to be afraid," he said gently. Emily smiled, a little sad, a little knowing. "You say that like you're not." He exhaled, the sound almost a sigh. "Maybe I am." The honesty in his voice reached her before his words did. She realized then that the man standing before her wasn't the untouchable CEO the world knew. He was just Ethan, the boy who'd waited too long for someone to come home. They stood there for what felt like forever, just breathing the same air. Neither spoke, because words would have made it smaller somehow. Finally, she stepped back, needing space to think, to feel. The ground beneath her felt different now, less steady, but more alive. "We should go," she said quietly. "Yeah," he said, though neither of them moved. The fog thickened around the bridge, swallowing the light. Somewhere below, a ferry horn echoed across the bay. The city went on as if nothing had changed, but everything had. As they made their way back toward the elevator, their shoulders brushed once more light, familiar, the kind of touch that lingers long after it's gone. Inside the elevator, the silence was softer this time, not empty, not waiting, just full of what they didn't yet know how to say. When the doors opened on the lobby floor, Ethan turned toward her, his hand hovering near hers, close enough that she could feel the warmth. "Emily," he began, but then stopped, unsure. She looked up at him, her eyes calm but bright. "You don't have to explain," she said. "Some things don't need words." He nodded, relief flickering across his face. "Still, I don't want you to think this was a mistake, she finished. He hesitated, then shook his head. No, not even close. Even, her chest tightened, a warmth spreading that had nothing to do with the air around them. Then don't ruin it by saying anything else, she whispered, her lips curving in a small smile. He laughed quietly, lowering his gaze. Fair enough. They stepped out into the street, where the pavement still gleamed from the rain. The city had thinned out to a quiet hum, and the wind carried the scent of the ocean. She turned toward him, meaning to say goodbye, but the word wouldn't come. Instead, she just looked at him, really looked, and for the first time, she saw not the man everyone else saw, but the man he was when he wasn't pretending. Something inside her shifted again, small but certain. She knew, without knowing how, that life after tonight would not be simple. It would not be safe, but maybe, for once, it would be true. She smiled faintly, a quiet understanding passing between them, and then she whispered, "Good night, Ethan." He opened his mouth as if to respond, but the words caught somewhere between his throat and his heart. So he just nodded. She walked away, her footsteps soft against the wet concrete, each one carrying her further from the safety she used to cling to and closer to something she couldn't name. Behind her, Ethan stood beneath the streetlight, watching until she disappeared around the corner. The night folded around him, warm and strange. He didn't know what would come next. Only that one simple but stolen kiss had rewritten something deep inside him. And for the first time in a very long time, he wasn't afraid of what that meant. The next few weeks unfolded like a secret summer, days that felt lighter than they should have, hours that slipped through their fingers before either of them could name what they were becoming. Ethan began to appear in Emily's world, not as the man in tailored suits and headlines, but as someone more human, someone curious about ordinary things. He texted her in the mornings just to ask what kind of coffee she was drinking, and sometimes she sent him pictures of half-finished sketches or the shadow of a plant on her window. There was an ease between them that neither tried to define. One Saturday, he showed up at her studio unannounced. The space was small, tucked behind a bookstore near the wharf. Emily looked up from her drafting table and froze when she saw him standing in the doorway, holding 2 cups of coffee and wearing a sweater instead of a suit. "You found me," she said, pretending to sound annoyed. He smiled. "You said you work near the water. I took a chance." She took the cup he offered, still warm against her palms. "You don't strike me as someone who does spontaneous." He leaned against the doorframe. "Maybe I'm learning." She laughed quietly. "That sounds dangerous. Maybe," he said, "but some risks are worth it." That afternoon, they walked down to the pier. The sky was pale blue, the kind of color that makes you believe in second chances. Seagulls wheeled above them, and the breeze smelled faintly of salt and fried dough from the food stalls nearby. Ethan stopped to buy a slice of pizza from a street vendor, folding it clumsily in half, the way he'd seen people do in movies. "You've never eaten pizza on the street before?" Emily asked, amused. "Not since college," he admitted, taking a bite that dripped sauce onto his sleeve. She laughed, handing him a napkin. "You're out of practice." "Apparently." He looked at her, smiling like a man who didn't mind being imperfect. "You're enjoying this?" "Absolutely." They sat on a wooden bench overlooking the water, their knees nearly touching. The sound of waves against the dock mixed with the laughter of children nearby. For a while, they said nothing. It was the kind of silence that felt full, not empty. Ethan watched the sunlight shift across her face, the way her eyes caught the reflection of the bay. "I can't remember the last time I did something like this," he said softly. "Something like what nothing important." He said, "Just this." Emily smiled. "That's the best kind of something." He nodded, as if committing the moment to memory. She didn't know that he'd canceled 2 meetings that morning, ignored 5 calls, and turned off his email for the first time in years. He hadn't told anyone where he was going. For once, he just wanted to exist without an agenda. A gust of wind lifted her hair, brushing it across her cheek. Without thinking, he reached out to tuck it behind her ear. His hand lingered for a moment, and she looked up at him, eyes soft. Something in the air shifted again, quiet, inevitable. "Ethan," she said, her voice barely above the wind. "You're not used to this, are you?" He smiled faintly. "What, being happy?" She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The look on her face was enough. Later that week, it rained, hard and sudden, the kind of rain that makes the city look alive again. They were walking back from a movie when the first drops fell. Emily squealed, trying to cover her head with her jacket, but Ethan caught her hand and laughed. "Come on," he said. "You'll miss it." "Miss what?" "This," he said simply, tilting his face up to the sky. The rain poured harder, drenching them in seconds. She couldn't stop laughing, half from surprise, half from something else, something that felt like being 10 years younger and fearless again. "You're insane," she shouted over the downpour. Probably he shouted back, laughing so hard it echoed through the empty street. They ran together through puddles, past dark shop windows and flickering streetlights, until they reached the edge of the pier again. There, breathless and soaked, they stopped. The world smelled of salt and rain and wet wood. Ethan looked at her, her hair plastered to her face, her dress clinging to her like a second skin, and said quietly, "You're beautiful." She laughed, shaking her head. "I look like a drowned cat." "Still beautiful?" he said. Something in his voice made her heartbeat stumble. She looked away, trying to calm the rush of emotion rising in her chest. "You really don't know how to take things slow, do you?" He smiled. "I'm learning that too." For a moment, neither of them moved. The rain softened, falling in thin silver lines around them. He took her hand again, his thumb tracing gentle circles against her skin. She could feel it, the pull between them, strong and quiet, the kind that doesn't ask for attention but demands to be felt. "Ethan," she whispered, "you're going to ruin your suit." He looked down at himself, drenched, then back at her. "I think I already did." She laughed again, but it caught in her throat, because behind the laughter, she knew this was different. This wasn't just a man being charming. It was someone learning how to live, one imperfect, beautiful mistake at a time. They walked home under the fading rain, talking about nothing and everything. He told her about his first car, a beat-up sedan that barely made it up the hills of Berkeley. She told him about her first apartment, the one where the ceiling leaked, but she loved it anyway because it was hers. When they reached her door, he hesitated. The night had gone still again, the air thick with the scent of wet pavement. "Emily," he said, his voice softer now, "I don't remember the last time I laughed like that." "Then, maybe you needed to," she said gently. He nodded. "Maybe I needed you." She froze. The words hung between them, fragile, terrifying, real. She wanted to tell him not to say things like that. Not yet. Not so soon. But instead, she just smiled. "Good night, Ethan. Good night, Emily." He lingered a moment longer before stepping away, his hand brushing hers one last time. When he finally turned to leave, she watched him go, her heart both lighter and heavier than before. Inside, she leaned against the door, eyes closed, the sound of rain still echoing in her mind. She didn't know what this was becoming. She only knew that it was real, and for the first time in a long time, real was enough. Outside. Ethan stopped halfway down the block, rain dripping from his hair, a quiet smile tugging at his lips. He looked up at the sky and whispered to no one in particular, "She's going to be the one that changes everything." And somehow, he knew he was right. The morning light spilled gently across the hardwood floor of Emily's apartment. The rain had stopped, leaving the air washed clean, the kind of calm that follows a storm. Ethan had gone home hours ago, but his presence lingered in the scent of coffee on the counter, in the faint warmth left on the couch where he'd sat beside her, laughing over nothing. She moved through the quiet, barefoot, holding her mug close. Something inside her felt weightless, like she was finally remembering what it meant to belong somewhere. And yet, beneath that fragile peace, a small thread of unease tugged. He was a man whose name opened doors. A man the world admired, envied, whispered about. She was just Emily, a woman rebuilding her life. One design, one quiet morning at a time. Every headline about him that she'd ever seen now hovered at the edge of her thoughts, the sharp suits, the perfect posture, the way people seemed to orbit around him. And she wondered how long before gravity pulled him back to that world. The phone buzzed on her counter. It was Rachel. Emily smiled, answering on speaker while she stirred milk into her coffee. So, Rachel's voice came through, teasing. "You disappeared. Again. Don't think I didn't notice." Emily laughed. "I didn't disappear. I've just been busy falling for the mysterious CEO, Rachel," she warned gently. "Oh, come on. You can tell me." "How bad is it?" Emily sighed, glancing toward the window. "It's good. Scary good." Rachel paused. "Scary how?" "Like I'm walking into something I don't belong in," Emily admitted. She searched for the right word. "He's steady, kind, in ways I didn't expect. But also, he lives in a world that doesn't make sense to me. Meetings, drivers, dinners where people wear names like armor." Rachel hummed softly. "And where do you think he sees you in that world?" "I don't know," Emily said. "Maybe I'm the reminder that he's still human. Or maybe I'm just the novelty, the ordinary girl who makes him feel real for a while." There was silence for a moment. Then Rachel's tone softened. "Emily, you've got to stop assuming people will leave before they even have the chance to stay." Emily swallowed hard. "It's not that simple." "I know," Rachel said gently. "But if he makes you laugh, really laugh, if he looks at you like you're not just passing through, maybe you should let yourself believe it, even if it's just for now." The line went quiet. Outside, the wind stirred through the trees, carrying the distant sound of a ferry horn across the bay. Emily closed her eyes for a moment, breathing in the stillness. That evening, Ethan called. His voice carried that soft rasp she'd come to recognize, tired but warm. "Come out with me," he said. "I promise it's not a boardroom or a gala, just us." She hesitated. "Wear surprise," he said. "Wear something comfortable." She met him at the wharf. He was waiting by the railing, wearing jeans and a black sweater, his hair slightly tousled by the wind. No entourage, no pretense, just him. He handed her a paper cup of hot chocolate. "Peace offering," he said. "For what?" "For making you think too much," he replied, smiling. "Come on." They walked along the boardwalk, their steps in sync. Street musicians played soft jazz near the pier, the notes weaving through the hum of the city. Ethan told her about his day, how he'd walked out of a meeting because he realized he didn't want to spend another hour talking about profits when he couldn't remember the last time he'd watched a sunset. Emily laughed. "So, you're rebelling against your own success." "Something like that," he said. "You ever think about how easy it is to build a life that looks right but doesn't feel right?" She nodded slowly. "I think that's how I lived for years." He looked at her, then not just at her, but into her, like he saw the pieces she hadn't named yet, and in that look, something in her settled. Later, when the streetlights flickered on, they shared a pizza from a paper plate, sitting on the curb like two teenagers. He insisted on the extra cheese. She made fun of him for folding his slice like it was a business deal. They laughed until their cheeks hurt. He reached for her hand without thinking. She didn't pull away. His fingers were warm, strong, steady against her skin. "Emily," he said quietly, "you know I'm not good at this, whatever this is." She smiled faintly. "You're doing fine." "I mean it," he said. I don't want to mess this up. You make me want to be better at things I've never been good at. Her heart ached not from doubt, but from how sincere he sounded. Still, that small voice in her head whispered, "He says that now." She squeezed his hand gently. "Maybe stop trying to be better and just be here." He nodded, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "Here's easy," he said. "With you, it is." The wind picked up, carrying the smell of sea salt and dough. She leaned into him, her head against his shoulder, and for a moment, the world felt simple. But later that night, lying awake in her apartment, she replayed his words in her mind. "You make me want to be better." They should have felt comforting. Instead, they echoed like a promise too fragile to last. Rachel's voice drifted back to her. "Maybe you should let yourself believe it." Emily stared at the ceiling, the faint glow of the city filtering through her curtains. She wanted to believe. She really did. But belief had cost her before. She turned on her side, clutching the edge of the blanket, and whispered into the quiet, "Please don't let this be another almost." Outside, the city kept breathing. Somewhere, down by the bay, Ethan sat in his car, staring at the steering wheel, his thoughts circling the same quiet fear that someone like him didn't deserve a heart as unguarded as hers. And though neither of them could hear it, their doubts moved in rhythm, fragile, human, and somehow already intertwined. The city shimmered in gold beneath the twilight, its skyline painted in soft amber and quiet blue. From Ethan's penthouse, the view stretched endlessly, the bay glittering in the distance, the fog rolling in, slow, like a secret. The kind of view most people would envy, but to him, it had always been a reminder of how alone success could feel. When Emily stepped out of the elevator and into the quiet expanse of his home, she paused. Everything was glass and shadow, modern, immaculate, yet strangely hollow. She could hear her own footsteps echoing across the polished floor. Ethan watched her from across the room. "You don't like it?" he said, not as a question, but as a truth already known. "It's beautiful," she said softly, "but it doesn't feel lived in." He smiled faintly. "That's because it isn't. I come here to sleep. Sometimes, mostly I work." Her gaze swept over the minimalist furniture, the sleek lines, the untouched art on the walls. It looks like a hotel suite waiting for someone who never arrives. He laughed under his breath. "That's one way to put it." Then, quieter. "I guess I never thought much about what home should feel like." She turned to him, her voice gentle. "Maybe because you've never had someone to share it with." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was the kind that holds too much truth. Ethan looked at her. The city's light reflected in his eyes, and for a moment, she saw the boy he used to be, the one who'd learned too early how to survive without warmth. "Emily," he said, stepping closer, "can I tell you something?" "Of course." "I hate this place," he confessed. "The view, the walls, the quiet. Everyone thinks it's the symbol of everything I've worked for. But it's not. It's just space. Expensive silence." She looked at him, her heart softening. "Then why stay?" He smiled a tired, unguarded smile. "Because I didn't know where else to go." The honesty in his voice ached. Without thinking, she reached for his hand. It was warm, strong, but it trembled just slightly when their fingers touched. He looked down at their joined hands, then back at her. "You make it feel less empty," he said quietly. "Just being here." She felt her breath catch. "Ethan?" "I'm not saying it right," he said, shaking his head. When I'm with you, everything stops feeling like a performance." Her heart fluttered. She had spent so long building walls, convincing herself that men like him could never mean words like that. And yet, here he was, the man everyone called cold, standing in front of her, stripped of every layer. The city lights flickered against the glass. Somewhere far below, A car horn echoed faintly. Emily stepped closer until there was only the faintest inch of air between them. Maybe, she said softly, it's not the place that's lonely. Maybe it's the person waiting in it. He smiled, small and real, and something inside him gave way. He reached up, his fingers brushing a strand of hair from her face, lingering against her cheek. The air between them grew warm, trembling with something tender, inevitable. I don't want to ruin this, he whispered. Then don't, she said. It was all the permission he needed. Their lips met slow at first, unsure, like they were both afraid the moment would vanish if they moved too fast. Then deeper, steadier. The world beyond the glass fell away, the city, the sounds, the space that used to echo with silence. There was only this. The warmth of his hands at her back, the press of her heartbeat against his chest. The way she sighed into the kiss like she'd been holding her breath for years. When they finally parted, neither spoke. They just looked at each other, breathing the same air, the same quiet truth. Ethan brushed his thumb across her lips, his voice unsteady. You're shaking again? I know, she said, smiling through the tremor. He exhaled a soft laugh. Still not cold, not even close. He drew her in again, holding her as if the act itself could make time pause. And maybe, for a little while. It did. Later. They sat by the wide glass window. The bay stretched before them in shimmering gold. She leaned against his shoulder, the blanket around them warm and soft. The world outside looked peaceful, unaware of the small universe they'd built in that moment. Ethan turned his head slightly, his voice barely a whisper. I used to think love was a distraction, that if I ever let someone in, everything I'd built would fall apart. And now she asked. He looked at her for a long time before answering. Now I think maybe I was building all of it just to find someone who'd stay anyway. Her throat tightened. You don't have to be perfect for someone to stay. Ethan, I know, he said softly. I just want to be honest. She smiled faintly. Then start with a promise. He tilted his head. What kind of promise? The kind that matters, she said. No lies, no pretending, no hurting each other to feel safe. His hand found hers again. I can promise that. She looked at him, eyes steady. Say it. I promise, he said. I won't hurt you. Emily. Not on purpose. Not ever. Her eyes shimmered. Then I promise too. He leaned in, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead, a quiet seal on their fragile truth. For a while, they stayed like that. The world beyond the window turned silver, the fog wrapping the bridge until it disappeared completely. Inside, the air hummed with the warmth of two people who'd finally stopped running from themselves. Emily traced the line of his hand with her fingers, memorizing it as if afraid it might fade by morning. She didn't know it yet, but that night that promise would become the line her heart would return to, again and again, when everything later fell apart. For now, though, the city slept, and so did their doubts. In that glass-walled quiet, love had found them unplanned, imperfect, and achingly real. The morning began softly, with sunlight spilling through Emily's curtains and the smell of coffee drifting through the apartment. She hummed to herself as she arranged a small vase of daisies on the table. It had been a week since that night at Ethan's penthouse, the night that changed everything. There was still a quiet glow inside her, a sense that maybe, finally, life was giving her something steady to hold on to. She glanced at her phone, smiling at the message he'd sent before dawn. Early meeting, don't forget breakfast. I'll see you tonight. It felt simple, safe. Then came the knock. Sharp, urgent. The kind of knock that doesn't belong in mornings like this. When she opened the door, Rachel stood there, hair messy, eyes wide, holding a folded newspaper in her hand. Emily, she said, her voice thin. You need to see this. Emily frowned. You're scaring me. What is it? Rachel hesitated, then handed her the paper. It was already creased from where she'd gripped it too tightly. On the front page, just beneath the business headlines, was a photo of Ethan Sharp's suit, confident smile, the skyline behind him, and above it, the words that made Emily's stomach twist. Wallace Tech nears billion-dollar merger board, pushes for CEO's stable image amid expansion. Her eyes moved down the column, heart pounding. Sources close to the executive team reveal that, in an effort to strengthen the company's reputation before the merger, Wallace Tech has been encouraging CEO Ethan Wallace to present himself as a grounded family man or, at minimum, someone in a serious relationship. The company's PR consultants are said to be coordinating his social appearances to reinforce this image. Emily stopped reading. Her hands trembled. This was published when Rachel swallowed, 3 days before your blind date. The words landed like a stone dropping into still water. Emily felt the sound ripple through her, echoing, distorting everything she thought she knew. She read the line again: serious relationship, image, coordination. It sounded so cold, so rehearsed. She forced a laugh, though it cracked in her throat. It could be a coincidence, right? Just timing. Rachel didn't answer. Emily set the paper on the table, her fingers pressed to her lips. No, she whispered. It can't be. He wouldn't. But even as she said it, the doubt seeped in. Every moment replayed itself in her mind, the way he'd looked at her across that first table. The careful words, the perfect timing. Could it all have been planned? Rachel's voice softened. I don't know him, but I know you, and I've seen what happens when you fall too fast. Emily turned away, her chest tightening. It felt real. Rachel? Maybe it was, Rachel said gently. But you need to ask yourself, was it real for him too? The apartment suddenly felt too bright, too quiet. She walked to the window, watching the city move beneath her, the same city where he worked, where people probably already saw them as a headline waiting to happen. She thought of his words that night, "I promise I won't hurt you." The memory stung now, like a bruise she hadn't noticed before. Rachel placed a hand on her shoulder. You should talk to him, before this becomes something you can't forgive. Emily nodded, though her throat felt tight. Yeah, I will. But when Rachel left, and the door closed, she didn't reach for her phone. She couldn't. Instead, she sat at the table, staring at the newspaper until the print began to blur. The day stretched long. Ethan called twice. She didn't answer. By afternoon, her phone was filled with messages. Are you okay? Please call me. Emily, talk to me. She read every one of them, her finger hovering above the reply button, but her hands wouldn't move. When the sun dipped low, she walked down to the wharf. The water was restless, the waves slapping against the wooden posts. It was the same place where they had first shared pizza, where he'd laughed until she forgot how to doubt. But tonight, the air felt different, colder, sharper. She pulled her coat tighter around her. Her reflection on the water looked like someone she didn't recognize, softer, maybe, but also smaller. What if she had been a prop in a story that wasn't hers? A photo op in a billionaire's redemption arc? The thought made her stomach twist again. Somewhere deep down, she wanted to believe there was another explanation, that his promise meant something more than convenience. But she'd learned long ago when people are powerful, their words can hide 1,000 motives. And yet, he wasn't like Daniel. She remembered the tremor in his voice when he spoke of his mother, the way he'd looked at her as if she was something rare. That wasn't acting, she thought. It couldn't be. But the paper on her table said otherwise. She stayed by the water until the wind turned cold enough to sting her cheeks. When she finally walked home, the apartment lights felt harsh. The vase of daisies she'd arranged that morning had begun to wilt, the petals curling at the edges. Her phone buzzed again, another message from Ethan. Emily, please. Whatever you've seen, whatever you're thinking, just talk to me. It's not what it looks like. She stared at the words, her thumb hovering, her heart heavy with something she couldn't yet name. She typed slowly, then stopped, deleted the message, set the phone down. For the first time since she'd met him, she didn't know if she could trust what she felt. That night, she sat in the dark, watching the city lights flicker through the window. The same city where his name was printed in ink, where her story had been written before she even knew she was part of it. And somewhere far above her, maybe, in that glass penthouse, Ethan looked out at the same skyline, reading the same story, realizing too late what it had done. Neither of them slept. And though the city moved as always, quietly, endlessly, something between them had already begun to break. The next morning, the city woke under a pale gray sky. Rain tapped against the window pane like a quiet warning. Emily sat at her kitchen table, the same newspaper still folded in front of her. The ink had begun to fade where her fingers had pressed too tightly the night before. She hadn't slept, not really. She'd just lain awake, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional hiss of passing cars, trying to make sense of a story that no longer felt like hers. Her phone lit up again. Ethan Wallace. The name alone sent a rush of pain through her chest. She stared at the screen until it went dark, then placed it face down. The silence that followed was too heavy, too final. She tried to eat, but her coffee turned cold, untouched. The air in the apartment felt different now, thinner, as if something essential had been taken from it. Maybe it was hope, maybe it was trust, maybe those were the same thing. By noon, she couldn't sit still anymore. She opened her laptop and clicked through her work files, her projects, the designs she'd once poured her heart into. All of it felt meaningless now. Every email, every plan, every reminder of a life that suddenly didn't fit. Her hands moved on their own, typing up a short, precise resignation letter. No explanation, no emotion. Just words to make it official. When she hit send, the sound of the click felt louder than it should have, like the closing of a door she hadn't meant to walk through. The next message she opened was from the airline. One-way ticket to Seattle. Flight tomorrow evening. She didn't even remember booking it, but the confirmation sat there, clear and irreversible. Outside, the rain had turned steady. She stood by the window, watching the city blur behind streaks of water. Somewhere out there, Ethan was probably in a boardroom or a meeting, doing what he always did, controlling the narrative, fixing what was broken, turning emotion into strategy. He was good at that. Too good. Her mind flashed back to the night in his penthouse, the warmth of his hand, the quiet promise he'd whispered, "I won't hurt you." It echoed now like a cruel joke, sharp enough to make her chest tighten. She whispered into the empty room, "You already did." Hours passed without her noticing. The apartment grew dim, shadows crawling along the walls. Her phone buzzed again and again, then stopped. She stared at it, willing herself not to care, but she did. God, she did. By evening, Rachel showed up with takeout and 2 umbrellas. She didn't say much, just sat beside Emily, opening the cartons of noodles and pushing one toward her. "You're leaving," she said quietly, not asking. Emily nodded. "Tomorrow." Rachel sighed. "And you're not going to talk to him?" "What would I even say?" Emily's voice cracked. That I fell for the perfect illusion that I believed every word until a headline told me otherwise. Rachel looked at her for a long moment. What if it wasn't an illusion? Emily shook her head. "Rachel, please, don't do that. Don't give me maybes. I can't survive on those anymore." Silence filled the space between them, the kind that says everything words can't. Rachel finally spoke, her tone soft but steady. "You know, sometimes people make mistakes that look unforgivable from the outside. But if he meant it, if what you had was real, you'll know it. because the truth doesn't stay buried for long. Emily didn't answer. She just stared at the rain outside, her reflection pale and tired in the window. Maybe, she said at last, but I can't wait around for it to find me. That night, she packed, slowly, methodically, her hands folded clothes into neat piles, her eyes tracing the walls as if memorizing them. Every corner of that apartment carried a piece of him, the laughter that lingered, the warmth of his hand brushing hers, the smell of his cologne still faint in her coat. She tried to shake it off, but memories cling hardest when you're trying to leave them behind. When her suitcase was zipped and ready by the door, she sat on the edge of the bed and finally unlocked her phone. A dozen missed calls, messages unread. The last one caught her eye. Please, Emily, let me explain. If you still believe in what we had, meet me, just once. I'll be where we first met. Her chest tightened. The rooftop restaurant, the beginning of everything. She stared at the message for a long time, her heart a battlefield between pain and longing. Then she powered off the phone. Some things, she told herself, didn't deserve second chances. The next morning, San Francisco greeted her with fog so thick it swallowed the skyline. She dragged her suitcase down the stairs, the wheels bumping against the worn steps. The taxi was waiting, engine idling, headlights cutting through the mist. Before she got in, she turned to look at the city one last time. The same city that had given her love and taken it away just as swiftly. She thought about Ethan, somewhere in a glass tower, maybe staring out at this same fog. She wondered if he was thinking of her, if he felt even a fraction of the ache tearing through her chest. But she didn't let herself linger there. Not anymore. The driver asked, "Airport." "Right." She nodded. "Yes, airport." As the cab pulled away, she watched the street slide past familiar corners, the cafe where they'd laughed until they cried, the pier where he'd kissed her in the rain. The memories blurred, like watercolor bleeding on wet paper. When the city finally faded from view, she leaned back, eyes closing. For the first time, there was no hope left to steady her, just silence and the dull, steady beat of a heart trying to forget. Back in the city, Ethan stood in his office, the newspaper spread across his desk, his phone silent, his reflection hollow. He'd read the article too many times, each word cutting deeper than the last. He knew how it looked, how it must have felt to her, and yet he also knew this wasn't how their story was meant to end. He grabbed his jacket, leaving the office without a word. By then, Emily's plane ticket sat printed in her bag, her name bold at the top. One way, no return, and though she didn't know it yet, this wasn't goodbye. It was only the breaking point, the place where every love story must decide whether to fade or to fight. The airport buzzed with that familiar kind of chaos, rolling suitcases, the low murmur of announcements, the faint smell of coffee and jet fuel. Emily stood in line at the check-in counter, her fingers wrapped tightly around the handle of her suitcase. She hadn't cried, not once, not even when she packed her things. It wasn't that she didn't want to. She just didn't know how anymore. The world around her blurred into background noise, families laughing, people hurrying, goodbyes and beginnings tangled together. For her, it all felt distant, like a movie playing behind glass. She glanced at her phone. No new messages. He'd stopped calling. Maybe he'd given up. Maybe that was for the best. When the attendant called for boarding passes, she opened her purse. That's when the phone buzzed again, a strange number, unfamiliar. She hesitated, thumb hovering over the screen. Instinct told her to ignore it, but something deeper, softer made her swipe to answer. Emily Carter. The voice on the other end was low, calm, older. "This is Richard Hale. I'm the vice president at Wallace Tech, Ethan's company." Her heart stuttered. Yes, this is Emily. How did you... I'm sorry to call you like this," he said quickly. "But I needed to..." She stepped out of line, her pulse quickening. Mr. Hale, if this is about the article, I really don't. It is, he interrupted gently. And that's exactly why I'm calling. Because you deserve the truth. Her breath caught. The truth? Yes. He said, about that blind date, about Ethan, about everything. The sound of her name being called for boarding drifted faintly through the speakers, but she didn't move. She pressed the phone tighter against her ear, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. Richard's voice came through, steady, measured. That evening at the Horizon, it wasn't Ethan's idea. It was mine. And I'm the one who told his assistant to reach out to your friend, to set up the date. The board was breathing down his neck about the merger. They wanted him to show the world that he wasn't just another young CEO. They wanted a story that made him look safe, relatable. Emily's stomach turned. So it was planned? Yes, Richard said quietly, but not by him. He hated the idea from the start, said it was manipulative, said it turned people into props. We argued for days. Finally, I told him it was just dinner, harmless. He didn't even know your name until the night of the date. Her voice trembled, but the timing, the article. The article was a leak. Richard said, someone on the PR team thought it would help the company's image to make it public. Ethan didn't approve that either. He found out the same morning you did. She pressed her hand to her forehead. Why are you telling me this now? Because he doesn't know how to reach you, Richard said. And because he hasn't stopped trying. You blocked his calls, his messages, everything. He's been, Richard paused, his tone softening. He's been a wreck. Emily? He hasn't been to the office in 2 days. He canceled the merger meeting this morning. She sank into one of the chairs near the window, the noise of the terminal fading to a hum. Canceled. Why? Because he told the board he wouldn't sign off on anything built on a lie, Richard said. He told them he'd rather lose the deal than live with himself if you walked away believing he used you. For a moment, Emily couldn't speak. Her throat felt thick, her eyes burning despite her efforts to keep them dry. You're saying he didn't know? She whispered, that he really loved you. Richard finished quietly. Yes, I think he does. And I think you do too. That's why you're at the airport instead of home pretending you're fine. Her hand trembled as she wiped at her eyes. You sound like someone who knows how this feels. Richard gave a small, weary laugh. Let's just say I've been in his shoes once. And I didn't make the call in time. For a few seconds, neither spoke. The voice on the loudspeaker called her flight again. Emily, Richard said, his voice steady but gentle. You don't owe anyone forgiveness. But before you decide this is over, you should at least know the story you're walking away from. The truth is, Ethan didn't fall for you because of timing or image. He stayed because he finally met someone who didn't care about his last name. She swallowed hard, her eyes fixed on the window. Outside, a plane was lifting into the gray sky, its lights blinking against the fog. Thank you, she said finally, for telling me. Just think before you go, Richard said softly. Not everyone gets a chance to be understood. The line clicked and the call ended. Emily sat there, phone still in her hand, her reflection caught in the glass. Behind her, the boarding line was thinning. The flight attendant gave one last call. She stood, her mind spinning, her pulse uneven. Her ticket crumpled slightly in her grasp. All this time, she'd been running from a story she thought she understood. But maybe she'd been running from the wrong thing. Her heart whispered what her pride wouldn't. What if it was real? She looked down at her phone again, at the dark screen that had once been filled with his messages. Her fingers hovered for a second, then pressed the power button. The screen lit up a flood of unread texts, missed calls, his name over and over. She opened the most recent one. I'll be at the Horizon. I'll wait as long as it takes. Her breath caught. The timestamp was 2 hours ago. The loudspeaker echoed again. Final boarding for Flight 232 to Seattle. Her heart beat once, twice, then she turned and started running. Her suitcase toppled behind her, wheels clattering against the floor, her shoes striking the polished tile with a rhythm that matched the rush in her chest. She ran past travelers, past gate signs and coffee stands, the announcement fading behind her. Outside the terminal, rain had started again, soft, steady, like the beginning of something rather than the end. She raised her hand, hailed the first cab she saw. "Where to?" the driver asked. Her breath came out in a single, certain word: the horizon. And as the car pulled into the wet gray streets, Emily realized her hands were shaking not from fear this time, but from hope. A fragile, impossible, beautiful hope that maybe love hadn't lied after all. The cab raced through the wet streets of San Francisco, windshield wipers slicing rhythmically through the rain. Emily sat in the back seat, her hands clenched together, her breath fogging the cold window. The city lights blurred into streaks of gold and red, bending like her thoughts wild, tangled, desperate to catch up to what her heart already knew. She didn't know what she would say when she saw him. She just knew she had to see him, to look him in the eyes and ask for the truth herself, not from headlines, not from strangers, from him. The man who'd looked at her like she was something real. The car slowed at a red light, and her phone buzzed again in her lap. She glanced down a notification, not a call. Live Ethan Wallace press conference, Wallace Tech headquarters. Her stomach twisted. She hesitated, then tapped the screen. The image filled her phone. Ethan, standing behind a podium in a dark suit. Microphones clustered in front of him. Flashes from cameras strobing against his face. He looked calm, but there was something in his eyes, that same stillness she'd seen the night he told her about his mother. The kind of stillness that comes before everything changes. She turned up the volume. "Good afternoon," he began, his voice steady, measured. "I know most of you are here to discuss the pending merger between Wallace Tech and Novatech Industries." A murmur rippled through the crowd of reporters. He paused, glancing briefly at the papers in front of him before setting them aside. "But before we talk about numbers, I need to talk about something else. Something more important." Emily's pulse quickened. The driver glanced at her through the mirror. "You okay back there?" She nodded, barely hearing him. "Just keep going." Ethan looked straight into the cameras now. "Over the last few weeks, there have been assumptions about my personal life, about the image this company has chosen to build around me." He drew in a slow breath. Some of those assumptions were true, but the story wasn't. The reporters leaned forward, pens poised. "I was told," Ethan continued, "that in order to make this merger succeed, I needed to present a version of myself that people could trust, the kind of man who looks stable, grounded, safe, and somewhere along the line, that stopped being about business and started being about me, about my life, about a woman who didn't ask to be part of it." Emily's heart pounded. The rain outside had softened to a hush. He went on, his voice low but unwavering. "I want to make one thing clear. The blind date that started this, it wasn't mine to arrange. It was done behind my back, under the pretense of strategy. I was angry when I found out, but I stayed because that night, I met someone who changed me." He paused, the sound of camera shutters clicking through the silence. "She wasn't part of the plan," he said. "She wasn't a press angle or a PR stunt. She was a person. A woman who looked at me like I was human, not a headline. And because of that, I owe her something I've owed no one in years, the truth." Emily's eyes stung. She pressed the phone closer, her breath trembling against the glass. He looked down for a moment, gathering himself. "So, today, I'm withdrawing from the merger, effective immediately." A wave of shock rolled through the room, reporters shouting, flashes bursting. Ethan didn't flinch. "I know what this means for the company," he said. "I know what it means for the investors, for the board, but I also know this: I can't build a future on something that began with a lie. Not anymore." He looked up again, straight into the camera, and in that instant, Emily felt like he was looking right at her. "I fell in love with someone who taught me what honesty really is," he said softly. "She reminded me that integrity isn't about image, it's about how you treat people when no one's watching. And if I lose everything because I chose to tell the truth, then maybe I'm finally becoming the man she believed I could be." A long silence followed. Ethan's jaw tightened. He nodded once to the crowd, then stepped back from the podium as voices rose in a storm of questions. Emily's vision blurred. She blinked hard, her hand covering her mouth. The driver spoke again. Gently, "Ma'am, we're here." The cab had stopped outside Wallace Tech glass towers reaching into the gray sky. Reporters clustered out front, cameras still flashing under umbrellas. She paid the fare without counting the bills, stepping out into the drizzle. The air smelled like wet pavement and electricity. Somewhere above, thunder rolled faintly over the bay. Through the glass doors, she could see the lobby polished marble, tall ceilings, a place that felt too big for the kind of emotion pulsing through her chest. People were already talking, scrolling through their phones, sharing the story that was spreading like wildfire across every newsfeed. Ethan Wallace withdraws from billion-dollar deal, cites truth over image. Emily took a step forward, then stopped. She could still hear his voice in her head. "I fell in love with someone who taught me what honesty really is." She felt the tears finally fall, warm against her cold skin. Not out of sadness, out of something far deeper, something that felt like belief returning to her, piece by fragile piece. Inside the building, she saw a movement near the far end of the hall. Ethan, walking slowly toward the elevators, shoulders heavy but posture sure. Cameras followed him, but his gaze stayed low, lost in thought. For a moment, she wanted to run to him right then, to close the distance, but she didn't. Not yet. She wanted him to have that moment, the one where a man finally stands up for the truth, even if it costs him everything. The rain grew steadier, soaking through her coat. She didn't move. She just stood there, under the weight of it, watching him disappear behind the elevator doors. Somewhere deep inside, she knew the man she'd fallen for hadn't vanished behind power or pride. He was still there, the same man who once said he didn't know how to be happy but wanted to learn. And tonight, in front of the world, he'd proved he was learning. Emily whispered into the rain, her voice trembling but full. "You kept your promise. Ethan?" The wind carried her words away, scattering them like petals across the street. And though she didn't know what would come next, one thing felt certain: this wasn't the end. This was the beginning of something brave, something honest, something that might finally be called love. Rain blurred the edges of everything: the pavement, the glass, the city lights. It was as if the whole world had softened into motion, rushing towards something unseen. Emily stood frozen for a heartbeat outside the terminal, breath sharp against the cold air. Ethan's voice still echoing in her mind. "I can't build a future on something that began with a lie." The words wouldn't stop replaying. They were everything she had ever needed to hear. Her suitcase sat abandoned near the curb, wheels glistening under the streetlight. She didn't look back. There was no time for luggage, or tickets, or logic. Her heart had already chosen. It was louder than reason, steadier than fear. She raised her arm, waving frantically at a yellow cab. It screeched to a stop, tires hissing against wet asphalt. She yanked open the door and climbed in, soaked to the bone. The driver glanced at her in the mirror, surprised by her urgency. "Where to?" Her breath came out in bursts. "Wallace Tech. Downtown. Please, as fast as you can." The driver nodded and pulled into the stream of headlights. For a while, there was only motion, the hum of the engine, the rhythmic slap of the wipers, the city sliding past in streaks of silver and amber. Emily pressed her forehead against the cold window, her pulse racing with every passing mile. She imagined him there alone, in the building that had defined his whole life. The weight of his decisions still settling, cameras flashing, people whispering, a storm of opinions swirling around him. But maybe, underneath it all, he was waiting. She whispered into the blur outside, "Please, don't leave yet." The cab turned onto Market Street, the roads slick and shining like mirrors. Traffic lights glowed red against the rain. At one intersection, they stopped behind a bus plastered with a headline in the bold white letters: "Ethan Wallace withdraws from multi-billion-dollar deal." Her heart clenched. The world had already heard what she'd just discovered. The man everyone called ruthless had just risked everything for her. For truth. She remembered the first time she'd seen him, how untouchable he'd seemed, how she'd promised herself not to fall for him. And yet, here she was chasing through a storm for the same man who'd taught her what vulnerability looked like when stripped of power. The driver's voice cut through her thoughts. Traffic's heavy near downtown. Might take a while. Her hand shot forward, gripping the back of his seat. "Please, there has to be another way." He studied her through the mirror, her trembling hands, the urgency in her eyes. Then he nodded toward a narrow street. "Hold on tight." The cab veered off, cutting through side roads, bouncing over puddles that splashed against the doors. Emily clutched the seatbelt, her pulse sinking with the thud of the tires. Time felt strange, both too fast and too slow. Every red light felt like an eternity. Every turn, a plea to the universe not to be too late. When they finally reached the business district, she could already see the glow of Wallace Tech ahead, a tower of glass rising into the mist, its logo faintly visible through the fog. The sidewalks shimmered with reflections of passing cars and umbrellas. Reporters still lingered outside, their equipment glinting under the streetlights. "Here we are," the driver said softly. Emily handed him a wad of bills without counting. "Keep the change." Then she pushed open the door and stepped into the rain. The wind whipped her hair across her face, cold water sliding down her neck. Her heels slipped on the wet pavement, but she didn't stop. She ran. Past the reporters, past the revolving doors, past the guards who called after her. The lobby lights felt blinding after the night outside. The marble floor slick beneath her shoes. "Miss, you can't," someone began, but she didn't listen. "Ethan Wallace," she gasped. "Where is he?" The receptionist hesitated, startled by the sight of this drenched, breathless woman. Then, almost reluctantly, she said, "Top floor, conference level." Emily didn't wait. She bolted toward the elevator, slamming her hand against the button. The doors closed just as a security guard rounded the corner, calling out something she didn't hear. Inside the elevator, she finally stopped to breathe. Water dripped from her coat, pooling around her shoes. Her reflection stared back at her eyes wide, hair wild, mascara smudged. She almost laughed through the tears. So this is what love looks like, she thought. Messy, desperate, alive. The elevator climbed, floor by floor, the numbers glowing one after another. 28, 29, 30. Each ding echoed louder in her chest. When it finally stopped, the doors slid open to a quiet hallway lined with glass walls and soft light. The boardroom at the end was empty now. Only faint echoes of voices remained, a few papers scattered across the long table. Through the glass, she could see the skyline fog-drenched, still trembling with rain. And then, beyond that, near the tall window at the far end, a figure. Ethan. He stood alone, his jacket off, sleeves rolled up, the tie at his collar loosened. His head was bowed, hands resting on the edge of the window frame. The city lights cast a pale glow on his face, weary, vulnerable, human. For a moment, she couldn't move. She just stood there, watching the man who had risked everything not for power, but for truth. Her voice came out small, trembling. "Ethan." He turned, slowly, and when he saw her soaked, breathless, standing in the doorway like a ghost pulled from his memory, something in his expression broke open. "Emily!" His voice cracked on her name. She took a shaky step forward. I saw your press conference. Her lips quivered into a faint, uncertain smile. You meant every word. He nodded once, eyes glistening, every one of them. Silence filled the room, heavy but gentle. The kind of silence where everything that needed to be said was already understood. Emily took another step. I almost left, she whispered. But then I realized maybe running wasn't what I needed to do anymore. A single tear slipped down her cheek. You didn't just walk away from a deal tonight. Ethan, you walked toward the truth. And I couldn't let you stand there alone. He closed the distance between them, slow but certain, his breath trembling like hers. When his hand reached for hers, the warmth of his touch felt like coming home after a long, cold storm. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. The city outside blurred into a sea of lights, the rain tapping softly against the glass. Emily leaned into him, her head resting against his chest. His heartbeat was fast, uneven, but real, the sound of a man who had finally stopped pretending. And in that stillness, that fragile moment between thunder and calm, she knew she hadn't been too late. The night had waited for her, just long enough for love to begin again. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime. Emily stepped out, her breath still uneven, her pulse quick and trembling from the run. The hallway stretched before her, quiet, dimly lit, the air heavy with the aftertaste of tension and truth. She could hear the faint hum of the city far below, the whisper of rain still brushing against the glass walls of the tower. Her shoes left small, wet prints on the polished floor as she moved toward the end of the corridor. And there he was. Ethan stood by the window, his back to her, a dark silhouette against the skyline. The world outside was washed in gray and gold streetlights reflecting off the soaked streets, fog curling low over the bay. He was motionless, his shoulders heavy, his reflection faint in the glass. A man who looked like he'd given everything and wasn't sure what he had left. Emily stopped just inside the doorway. For a moment, she couldn't speak, couldn't even breathe. There was something sacred about that silence, the kind that lives between two people when words have already said too much. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. Ethan. He didn't move at first. Then slowly, he turned. His eyes found hers. And whatever composure he'd held onto all this time shattered. The exhaustion in his face gave way to disbelief, to something raw and wordless. He took one step toward her, then another. His voice broke in the middle. You came back. Emily nodded, tears gathering faster than she could blink them away. I couldn't leave, not after what you did. Ethan's breath caught. He shook his head slightly, as if trying to understand. I didn't expect forgiveness. I just couldn't let them turn love into a performance. Not yours. Not mine. She took a small step closer. You didn't have to prove anything to me. He let out a quiet laugh, the kind that hurts to hear. Maybe not, but I needed to prove it to myself. The room fell quiet again, the sound of rain the only thing that dared to move between them. Emily's heart ached at how tired he looked, the loosened tie, the dark circles beneath his eyes, the tremor in his voice. Yet, in all of that, she saw something she hadn't before: peace. The peace that comes after a battle you were never sure you'd win. She crossed the last few feet between them. Her voice softened. You chose the truth. Ethan, you lost everything people thought mattered, but you found the one thing that actually does. He blinked, and a single tear slipped free, tracing the edge of his cheek. And what's that? Her answer came quietly, steady. Yourself. For a heartbeat. Neither of them moved. Then, without warning, the distance between them closed. She reached for him, and he caught her in his arms like someone finally remembering how to breathe. The sob that left her chest wasn't just from sadness, it was from release. From weeks of holding everything in. He buried his face in her hair, his voice rough. I thought I'd lost you. She smiled through tears. You almost did. Then, pulling back just enough to meet his eyes, she whispered, but you did the right thing. Ethan, and now it's my turn to choose. His brow furrowed slightly, his voice barely audible. Choose what her fingers brushed against his jaw, trembling but certain. You chose honesty, now I choose you. The words hung there, quiet and irrevocable. And when he heard them, something in him gave way the walls, the guilt, the fear. He pulled her close again, arms wrapping around her as though the world outside had ceased to exist. They stood like that for a long time, no grand declarations, no need for explanations. Just the sound of two heartbeats slowly finding the same rhythm again. The storm outside had softened into drizzle. Through the window, the city lights shimmered like scattered stars, their reflections rippling across the wet glass. Ethan finally spoke, his voice a fragile thread. When I saw you at the door, I thought I was imagining it. I thought maybe I'd finally broken for good. Emily smiled faintly, wiping away the tears on his cheek with her thumb. You didn't break. You just stopped pretending you weren't human. He laughed softly, a sound that trembled between relief and disbelief. You have no idea how long it's been since anyone's seen me that way. Her gaze softened. Then look now. Because I see you. All of you. He exhaled, his forehead resting against hers. I don't deserve you. Maybe not, she whispered, but love isn't about deserving. He smiled, eyes glistening. You sound like someone who's forgiven me. She shook her head gently. No, someone who's finally stopped running. For a moment, the room felt still, the air charged with that fragile calm that follows a storm. Outside, the clouds began to part, a faint glow slipping through, hinting at the moon beyond the fog. Ethan pulled back just enough to look at her, his voice barely a murmur. What happens now? Emily's lips curved into the smallest, softest smile. Now, we start over. No headlines, no lies, just us. He let out a shaky laugh, a tear sliding down his cheek. I don't even know where to begin. She leaned in, brushing her lips against his with the gentleness of someone finally coming home. Right here, she whispered. This is where it begins. The city outside seemed to pause for them, the rain easing, the night holding its breath. Inside the tall glass tower, under the faint hum of lights, two people who had been broken by the same lie found their way back to truth and to each other. Emily pressed her head against his chest again, her voice barely audible. You did the brave thing tonight. Ethan, you chose what was right over what was easy. I won't forget that. He tightened his hold around her, his words warm against her hair. And I won't forget that you came back. The clock on the wall ticked softly, marking the passing of a single, precious moment, one that neither of them would ever lose again. Outside, the fog began to lift. A faint silver glow spread over the bay, and for the first time in what felt like forever, morning didn't feel so far away. And there, in that quiet between night and dawn, Ethan and Emily finally let themselves believe that maybe love, when it's real, doesn't end with goodbye. It waits, it forgives, it begins again. 6 months later, the world around them had slowed down. The rush of headlines had faded, the noise of the city no longer pressed so close. In a quiet corner of Sausalito, just across the Golden Gate, a small apartment sat bathed in morning light. Its windows were always open. The scent of salt and eucalyptus drifted in with the breeze. Inside, the walls were soft and pale, filled not with grand art or statements of success, but with moments. Photographs tacked up unevenly, a worn coffee mug with a chipped rim, plants leaning toward the sunlight as if listening to something only they could hear. Emily stood by the window, a sketchbook resting against her knees, her bare feet pressed into the warm wooden floor. Across the street, a child's laughter echoed, carried by the wind. The world felt slower here, honest in a way that the city had never been. Behind her, Ethan was making coffee, his sleeves rolled up, the smell of roasted beans filling the air. It had become their morning rhythm, the quiet shuffle of footsteps, the clink of mugs, the soft murmur of rain on days when the fog didn't lift. He looked different now, softer. Not the man the magazines once called the Ice CEO. His hair was a little longer, his laugh easier. There were still long nights when he woke from old dreams boardrooms, deadlines, voices, but Emily was always there. Sometimes she'd reach for his hand without a word, and that was enough. He set a cup beside her on the windowsill and leaned in. "You're awake early," he said. She smiled faintly. "The light woke me. It's different here. It feels alive." He followed her gaze to the open window, where sunlight spilled across the table, catching the faint shimmer of dust in the air. "It's honest," he said quietly. "There's no pretending in light like this." They stood together in silence, watching the fog lift off the bay. Boats drifted lazily across the water, gulls circling above. The world, for once, didn't demand anything of them. After a while, Ethan reached into his pocket. His fingers fumbled for a moment, not from hesitation, but from the kind of nervousness that comes when something truly matters. He turned to her, a small box in his hand. No velvet, no pretense. Just a plain wooden case, smooth and simple. Emily blinked, a soft laugh escaping her. "Ethan, what are you doing?" He exhaled, meeting her eyes. "Something I should have done a long time ago. Something without cameras or pressure or timing." He opened the box. Inside was a ring not grand, not dazzling, but beautiful in its simplicity. A thin gold band with a small stone, like a drop of morning dew caught in sunlight. Her breath hitched. "It's a promise," he finished for her. Not of perfection, not even of forever, just of truth. He took her hand gently, the warmth of his fingers grounding her. "I promise I'll always choose honesty, even when it's hard, even when it costs me, because you taught me that the only thing worth keeping is what's real." The morning light touched his face, then soft and golden, and in his eyes, she saw no trace of the man she once feared losing, only the man who had chosen to be found. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't look away. She let him slide the ring onto her finger, the band cool against her skin. It wasn't an engagement, it wasn't a declaration for the world. It was something quieter, a vow that belonged only to them. She whispered, "I choose you too. Not for what you've done, or what you lost, but for who you became." He smiled that small, honest smile she'd come to love most and pulled her close. The coffee on the sill grew cold. Outside, the light deepened, the fog melting away until the sky stretched wide and blue above the bay. They stayed there a long time, wrapped in the kind of silence that doesn't need to be filled. Later, as the day leaned into afternoon, they walked down to the small dock near their building. The wood creaked softly under their steps. The water below shimmered, catching pieces of light like broken glass mending itself. Ethan slipped his arm around her shoulders. "You know," he murmured, "I used to think success was about never falling." And now, she asked. He looked out over the bay, his voice low. "Now, I think it's about learning to rise differently each time." She smiled, resting her head against his shoulder. "Then, we're doing just fine." The wind lifted her hair, carrying the faint scent of sea and sunlight. Across the water, the bridge glowed faintly red in the distance, steady, enduring, graceful in its weight. A gull cried overhead. The tide lapped softly against the posts. Somewhere, a bell rang from a boat drifting out to sea. Ethan reached for her hand again, his thumb brushing the ring. "No matter what comes," he said, almost to himself, "I'll keep choosing this. Choosing you." Emily squeezed his hand. "And I'll keep choosing us." The world around them shimmered quiet, ordinary, and extraordinary all at once. As the sun dipped lower, turning the bay to liquid gold, They stood together at the edge of the dock. For the first time in a long time, there was no rush, no fear, no unfinished story waiting behind them, just peace. And when Emily finally closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of the light on her face, she thought maybe love isn't about how it begins or ends. Maybe it's about the moments in between, the small ones, the true ones, the ones that teach you how to stay. Behind her, Ethan whispered something she almost didn't catch. "I promise," he said softly, "I'll always choose the truth, and I'll always choose you." The wind carried his words out over the water, scattering them like sunlight over waves. And in that quiet, golden hour with the tide breathing gently below, and the world finally still, their story came to rest. Not with an ending, but with a beginning. A simple truth that would linger long after the light faded. When love is real, you'll give up everything for it, even the life you thought you wanted just to keep what's true. Sometimes, life reminds us that truth is the most fragile and also the most powerful thing we can hold. In a world where appearances often matter more than sincerity, Ethan and Emily's story teaches us that love built on honesty will always outlast love built on image. It's not the grand gestures that keep people together, but the quiet courage to stay true when it's easier to hide. Many of us, with years behind us, know how easily pride or fear can silence the heart. But time has a way of stripping life down to what really matters: kindness, forgiveness, and truth. Choosing to be real, to love without pretense, to admit when we're wrong, to stand by what feels right, that's where peace begins. Ethan gave up everything the world told him to chase, and in doing so, he found something priceless himself. Emily chose to believe again, even after being hurt, and discovered that trust can bloom twice if it's watered with honesty. Their story reminds us all when love is true. It doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be real. And it's never too late to start living that kind of truth. Thank you, dear friends, for staying with us until the very end of this story. If Ethan and Emily's journey touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who believes in the power of honesty and love, and subscribe to our channel for more heartfelt stories like this one. Your support means the world to us. It helps keep these quiet, soulful tales alive. Until next time, take care of your heart and never stop believing in the beauty of truth.